Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
Thank you so much for visiting us, Mr. Ambassadors, and hope you enjoyed staying here with us. Your background is quite followed with economics, climate changes, energy portions and things like that. Can we consider that besides politics, it will be main areas what you're going to be following as a general purpose of your work, what you're going to be doing for next years in Georgia?
Well, economics, politics, it's all connected.
Indeed.
So my main focus is going to be to accompany Georgia and to support Georgia on its path towards the European Union. Georgia has declared it wants that membership, and we, the European Union, have said we welcome the membership. So the main focus, the framework of my work is supporting Georgia on that path. I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
Yes,
the details of those paths as we go along.
How we're doing, that's going to be my next question.
Yes, and but that path is, of course, not only a political development. Much of it will have to do with the economy, with being ready to be part of the single European market. And I would like to take my experience and put it into value in Georgia. I would be delighted if after a few years of doing service here, I could say there were some economic projects that I had a part in, that created jobs, that advanced skills, that brought income, prosperity to Georgia. Yes, so that would be very nice indeed.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned about Georgia standing on the road to European integration. How far we are?
I think you are doing pretty good. What we understand is that the will of the Georgian people across the board is very strong. To join the European Union, there's three elements that candidate countries or countries that wish to join have to bring. The first is obvious. You have to share the values and the goals of the European Union. We're like a club. We want people to share our goals and values. The second, and that's a principal part of goals and values, you have to be a sustainable, pluralistic democracy. We're a club of democracies. There's no place for undemocratic states in our union. And the third is the economic aspect. The economy of the country that wishes to join has to be ready to withstand pressures that come with the internal market. Once you're in the EU, it's one market. There's no customs, there's no kind of protection for your market, for your companies from the competition. So it has to be a mature economy. And Georgia on all those areas is making good progress. There's more progress to be made. Right now you have what we call the European perspective.
Correct.
At some point we'll follow the candidate status. And once you have the candidate status, we begin official negotiations. And those negotiations have to lead to a point where the European Union says Georgia has achieved the acquis. In other words, has transposed the full body of European regulation, laws, and standards, or is ready to transpose that in the short term. And that's a giant task, because the full body of European legislation, regulation, and standards, has to do with the political, the way the state is organized, the judiciary, and so on. But then every detail of public life, the quality of the water, the safety of the pedestrian crossings, just to name arbitrary examples. It's a very broad and deep agenda.
Before that, as you absolutely correctly mentioned, we should fulfill some homework, let me say so, about 12 quite well-known recommendations for the whole Georgian population. I'm sorry. What's your personal expectation expectations in these regards? And do you think that is there anything what threatens Georgian democracy?
My expectation is that Georgia can fulfill those 12 recommendations. It's in the hands of the Georgians.
Correct.
And of the Georgian political system. I like to say the ball is in your court, but different than in sports, we are here to help you play the ball, to return the ball. And that's true of the Union, the European Union, the Commission, of all the member states. All our cooperation is geared towards supporting you. There are some areas where I believe more progress will have to be made. If you don't mind my saying so, one is the polarization. Mm-hmm. It's very important for Georgia to send a message. We have a consensus that we want this. We are all working in this direction, and we're working together on it. If the message that comes to the European Union is that the Georgians just can't get along and can't agree on anything, I don't think that's as helpful as it needs to be. But on the other hand, the government has a clear agenda, a clear legislative process. They say everything will be delivered in terms of laws by Christmas time, by the end of the year. So we're observing that. The process is important. It should be an inclusive process involving all political forces in the country. And of course, we'll have to look at the results. But as I said, it's really a teamwork. We're both, the European Union, its member states, and Georgia are working together on this goal.
Yeah. Before moving to the main interest of mine, I mean economics and business, there is one thing which really bothers me, and I think the whole Georgian community. Mr. Ambassador, we might not face so-called depolarization in general, but there is no polarization in regards of how we are moving towards the EU. That's where everybody is united, I mean, within them. But as you absolutely right mentioned, we might have the situation where polarization exists, but at the same time we have fulfilled all the obligations which are going to be definitely observed and monitored later on. I mean, the quality, the purpose, aims, all the recommendations. Do we have still a chance when the community is united for the aims that there is no polarization in this regard, that we are following EU, we want to be a part of this family, as you mentioned, the club?
Yes.
We see that the door is opening for us, but at the same time, internal political polarization still exists. It might be restriction for
no, you will.
this process.
You definitely have the chance and will have the chance. I mean, political polarization exists in other countries as well.
I think.
And
it depends on the level. Yeah.
It depends on the level, and a lively political debate is part of pluralistic democracies.
Absolutely.
It's the form of the debate, and can a consensus be achieved? What I notice sometimes here is that people don't argue about policy proposals, they argue about the legitimacy of the other person, of the other party. And I think that's rather less helpful. So just, I would say, bring down the temperature a little bit, be careful about personal attacks, and be careful about delegitimizing other political forces. I'm not here to tell the Georgians how to run their politics, how to have their debates. That's not my job. Georgia is for the Georgians. All I can say is the impressions that some developments make on us Europeans. But the bottom line is, of course, you have the opportunity is here. I would just like to add, it's also now.
Yes,
you know,
momentum.
At the end of next year, the European Council will reconvene to see how the aspirant countries are doing. So we have around 1 year that really, really counts.
Thank you for this. Let's move to another favorite part of my job, I mean economics and business. Where do you see personally the potential of growing our economic relations? We do remain, Germany remains as a leading trade and economic partner of Georgia. That's the truth, submitted by and confirmed by statistics. And according to the data from 7 months, what we have confirmed, export has a 10% share in the trade between Georgia and Germany. But still, we know that there is no bottom or end line in these relations. And where do you see potential as a person who might be and is just ambassador for first 3 or 4 months, but at the same time with a huge background doing economics in your previous jobs?
So I see a lot of upward potential. First of all, I think the general perspective from Europe to Georgia and the South Caucasus has changed. If I had come here last year, it would have been a different picture. We've had the Russian aggression against Ukraine that changes everything. And we've had the offer of the European Union to give Georgia the European perspective. So all of a sudden, Georgia is heading towards the EU under completely changed conditions regarding Russia. Mm-hmm. We said before you can't change geography, but we don't know what this outcome will be. But I would say that the attractiveness of Russia is suffering a lot. It's a shame. We want peace and stability and prosperity for Russia, but not a Russia that doesn't respect the territorial integrity of its neighbors and wages aggressive criminal military war against its neighbors. So all of a sudden this region can develop a whole new dynamic. And there's the concept of the middle corridor.
Absolutely.
So if some trade and investment routes, economic development routes, let's call them, that used to go via Russia, all of a sudden are looking for a new direction, the Southern Caucasus region comes into play, and especially Georgia. Because Georgia has many things going for it, a certain economic liberalism, history of being advanced in economic terms, and openness, cultural proximity. And this middle corridor, it's logistics, yes, and everything that's connected to it, but not only. It can be energy, it can be investment. I think the perspective of Georgia to German companies, and I'd like to support German companies in having this perspective, is can I have an early starter advantage by going to Georgia that will most likely join the EU at some time? So coming here maybe a few years before that happens, you can be established in a dynamic market with a regional perspective. And if I can just mention the one big project that kind of symbolizes this whole potential, and that's the electricity cable under the Black Sea. As you know, we're having a bit of an energy crisis in the European Union. We're having a climate crisis. We need energy. We need green energy. Georgia has the good fortune of having a lot of hydro potential power, but you also have wind power potential. Perhaps regionally we can add solar power. Producing green energy here, selling it to the European Union through an electricity cable under the Black Sea is just symbolic of this new regional economic perspective under new conditions.
Same was mentioned yesterday from EU Commissioner Jorge about the importance of this cable for the whole Europe, and the same political messages were delivered. Can you evaluate more specific about your personal efforts about developing this trade and economic business relations between Georgia and Germany?
Yes, so I mean, business is for the business people. The diplomats can have a supporting role.
Absolutely.
But one is to get the information out, make sure that everyone knows about potential. So I'll be speaking and writing about what I see here in Georgia, where I see potential, and trying to get that information to German businesses, and vice versa, informing Georgians about perhaps opportunities that
might occur, yeah.
That might occur, and not only specific business deals, but sectors that could be of interest. At the same time, of course, we have a lot of programs going in terms of development cooperation, where Germany finances private sector development, the development of renewable energy, legislation in certain areas that are relevant for business. And maybe I can just mention the one area of skills development.
Skills.
It's very, very important to Georgia. I mean, we all know we have an issue of companies not being able to find the skilled people that they need. On the whole chain of skills, from highly trained engineer just to a skilled worker. We all know also that there's an issue, a challenge, that Georgians are leaving the country to take jobs somewhere else. So of course, if we develop the skills of people in Georgia, that will lift the whole economy. And it's one of the focal points of German development cooperation. We have a team here now that's assessing a multi-million euro program that we want to offer to Georgia, where we work with the colleges to develop, we call it vocational training.
Education?
Yeah, training curricula. We work with the government to help them, support them in developing the legislation or regulation around. We work with companies to get them ready to train people. Absolutely. And we work with young people themselves to educate them about opportunities. And you know, sometimes people say, what's the secret of German export success around the world? Why are there small and medium-sized German companies that nobody knows their name because it's not a consumer product, but they're world leaders in technology, world leaders in sale in their sector. And one of the secrets that I can reveal, I don't know all the secrets, and if I did, I couldn't reveal them all, but one of the secrets is that German companies train their people. German companies invest into their employees. There's a saying that if you tell me it's expensive to invest in your people, just think about how expensive it is not to invest in them. And that's something in the DNA of German companies with our vocational training system, which ultimately goes back to the Middle Ages. And the key is that the state and business share the responsibility. They work together in developing the curriculas, in defining the types of jobs, the types of qualification that's needed. And you know, we have this trainee scheme, so the young people, by and large, who join that, they would leave after 10 years of school. They get hired by a company as a trainee, and their training is modular. Sometime on the job in the company, but in a well-organized process, and sometime, this is the state responsibility, in a vocational school, where they then learn the mathematics and the geometry or physics. Legal environment, chemistry, personal skills. The key is really that business steps up and says, state, you and I, we're going to do this together. That way you train for really the business needs. You don't train a cohort of people who maybe have some theoretical knowledge, but the companies say, it's not really what we're looking for right now, and we have to pay again to continue training them.
Tell me, did you meet with local German companies? already.
I have.
How do they do? And are there any concerns, any needs? Well, business is always asking and requesting, it doesn't matter, Georgian or German, for more, but at the same time, what kind of feedback do you have from them?
Yeah, so there are a number of German companies that are doing quite well here. You probably know some of them that are in the building and construction material trade, some that are in business process outsourcing, quite large companies. I've met some agricultural companies, even some Germans are making wine here or growing other agricultural products.
You met a lot.
I met with investors into wind farms, and they're doing quite well. They're suffering from the difficulty of being able to hire skilled people.
Yeah.
In fact, I met one company, they said we have a job opening, well paid for an engineer.
But no.
Very difficult to find.
Yeah.
So that's clearly a challenge. And there are some, I think there's many opportunities, as I said. There are some challenges, for example, in renewables, in the, how do you say, what is the scheme to determine the price of the electricity that you sell from renewables? It's not yet known. I think it's coming soon, but
CFD
and so on. So something new is coming, but it's been on hold for a while. So for an investor,
we need to know some specifics. Correct. Yeah.
For an investor, if he doesn't know the price of his product, the pricing mechanism, it's hard to do the project. There are some barriers, I believe, in agricultural investments that have to do with ownership of the land. I should add that I think quite interesting is the whole sector of tech. And startups. I've met with some Georgians working in that area. I see that there's a big tech affinity here. Yeah. Digitalization is very spread. Everybody likes to use the apps. The Wi-Fi is strong. So I believe there's talent here that German companies could have access to. There's a regional dimension that German companies could access via Georgia. And vice versa, we can offer access to Germany, which is quite strong in startup kind of business, and through us into the European Union market, which we will soon both be part of. But perhaps Germans can also discover a young tech entrepreneur here who has a great idea that may be going global soon.
Who knows?
And I hope it's not just gaming. I like apps that help to improve the world, on the environment, on traffic, on education, on useful fintech. So that's an area that I really think deserves more attention.
Yeah, going back to some figures and statistics, first half of the current year, the largest volume of investments from Germany was made in financial, real estate, agriculture sectors. And as you mentioned, you see potential in other sectors as well. Am I right?
Yes.
And are you specified with some areas already, or
I think renewables
definitely
could be very good. I'm not sure whether we mentioned leisure, tourism, hotels. That's, of course, a sector that Georgia, being a wonderful, beautiful country that people love to travel to, has big potential. And Germany is very strong in all those areas.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Transport, logistics.
Infrastructure, maybe.
Infrastructure, always. We Germans do good infrastructure. We're sometimes a little bit more expensive than competitors from other countries, but
known as a quality.
Hopefully known as the quality, and that the price difference will be made up through longevity. And
during these first months, Mr. Ambassador, how do you evaluate the business and the investment environment generally in Georgia? I mean, including feedbacks from German
Yes, in
Businesses
general,
as well?
good.
In general, good.
Good. I think the regulatory environment is good, the ease of doing business is good, and I think the surveys bear that out. I would say in a regional comparison, you do very well.
Very well. Can you be more specific, beside vocational education, about your plans for the upcoming year because of this uncertainty happening around? Are there already identified specific plans for further economic cooperation? And at the same time, just a few days ago, we've been facing the delegation, which was presented in Georgia as well. I mean, it was also presented from business people. So tell me about it.
A German delegation?
Yes. It was from the 7th till 10th of November. Am I right?
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, next year the focus will be and should be on Georgia's path towards the EU, fulfilling the 12 recommendations and advancing on that.
Okay.
Because as I said, towards the end of the year, the European Commission and then the European Council will look and make an assessment. So that's absolutely a critical year. And a year is short. There's no time to lose. I think that's the main point. There is going to be a highlight in German-Georgian relations, and that's going to be the International Tourism Fair from 7th to 9th of March in Berlin. It's called ITB, Internationale Tourismusbörse,
Wow.
International Tourism Exchange.
Exchange.
It's the world's largest trade fair for the tourism trade, and Georgia is going to be the guest of honor. So it's a giant thing, both for the fair in Berlin and for Georgia. And I know many VIPs from Georgia will be traveling. You have a big delegation, and you'll be able to present Georgia as a tourism, leisure, traveling country to the global market, which assembles in Berlin for that occasion. So that's
hopefully we're going to be there just to picture everything.
Let's go together.
Yes,
I would like to go, yeah.
So I will be definitely there as well.
And I hope that we will also have some high-level political visitors from Berlin.
By March?
Not necessarily by March, but in the next year.
I mean, for the next year, yeah?
In the next year, yeah.
You mean, yeah, okay. I got you.
Yeah.
Political. I hope that this business delegation will also be a part of this political.
Yeah, business delegations, like I said, I will really invest a lot of energy in bringing businesses here. The delegation you mentioned is part of a program by our Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs. It's one of the tools they have. They call it market research trips, where they organize, they do it worldwide, trips, and they say, we're offering a trip to Georgia. Who would like to find out more about this market? And the support of the government is that they organize the trip for a group and help organize a nice program, interesting interlocutors, so they can really get a feel for opportunities that exist. And all those things will continue. And
Okay, my last question comes from one of your public speeches, I mean the last one, where you addressed to the local community, I mean Georgian authorities and others, I mean guests. You've been mentioning twice Martin Luther King and Robert Schuman as well.
Yes.
Both of them. And mentioning we shall overcome.
Yes.
It feels, as an editor, I'm trying to feel speakers while not listening maybe them, but through the words. You mentioned about how do you see the future of the democratic countries and values uniting there. We shall overcome?
Yes, so I said this at my speech for German National Day, the reception that I gave here in Tbilisi on that occasion. And so if we're talking about European Union Georgia joining the European Union, we're talking about the history of Europe after World War II. And I mentioned Robert Schuman because our answer to the horrors of the 20th century in Europe, to the horrors of World War II, the Holocaust, for which Germany was responsible, was that we were fortunate that in 1945, wise women and men said, no more war. How do we do this? And they came up with the mechanisms of the European Union. That's why I mentioned Robert Schuman. And we're facing today, globally, a challenge to the values of democracy, pluralism, egalitarianism. That's on the inside of countries. And we're facing a challenge internationally to what we call the rules-based international order, which means that there's international law, that we discuss things, we agree things through negotiations, and we settle differences also through negotiations and agreements. We don't settle difference through violence, attack, war, crimes, that we respect the right of every country to choose its own path, that we don't change borders through force. So all those things are being challenged. Russia is a clear example. There are other countries that also challenge the European view of what the right way should be. And that's why I mentioned Dr. Martin Luther King, who was a great civil rights defender in the United States. And he said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So I tried to put that into the context to say the European Union was Europe's answer to war, to fascism, to oppression, to injustice. And it may take some time, and it may go up and down, or history, people say, is a history a circle or a straight line? Well, it may just be a spiral, but I believe it moves forward. And in that same speech, I also mentioned that in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and in the early 1990s, the Iron Curtain fell in Europe, and history moved in a positive direction. And so I believe that in the long run, the values of democracy, equality, pluralism, and an international system that's based on law and respect for the others will win. And Georgia joining the European Union is part of that process.
I have another final wish. I do not have any questions for this time anymore, but I do hope that we're going to be a part of that spiral you mentioned. While during your being here in Georgia, Georgia will make huge, the final steps for being a part of the EU family. And I hope that I will enjoy and celebrate this membership process and Georgia's progress in these regards as well. So many thanks, Ambassador Fischer, for this. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for your interview.
Thank you so much. I entirely share your hope. I think it's a very justified hope. I like to say Georgia is already part of the European family, but now you want to join the organization.
Yeah, to legalize.
Family is like almost a birthright, something that comes naturally. But it's like in a family. If you want to join the family business,
here we are.
There's another level of tasks to be performed, but both are going to work out fine. So thank you very much.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.